Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College, a program that invites you into discussions taking place in your community on today's local and global issues. Now, your host for Conversations from St. Norbert College, the Dean and Academic Vice President of the college, Michael Marsden.
Good evening. My name is Michael Marsden, and I'm your host for this edition of Conversations from St. Norbert College. Our very special guest this evening is Dr. Hassan Abbas, a visiting scholar at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. He's a media commentator and author as well, who is visiting St. Norbert College. Our focus this evening is on key issues in the Middle East. Dr. Abbas recently received his PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, where his research focus was on nuclear proliferation. He also writes on Islam and modern-day Islamic fundamentalism. He's considered one of the leading experts on South Asia and the terrorist organizations that are based in the Pakistan-Afghanistan region. Prior to his present academic endeavors, he served in important staff positions in the administration of President General Musharraf from 1999 to 2000 and Prime Minister Bhutto from 1995 to 1996 in Pakistan. Dr. Abbas regularly appears on MSNBC and NECN as an analyst on issues related to Pakistan, Afghanistan, and international terrorism. Dr. Abbas, welcome to our program. We're really pleased to have you with us, both on campus and on the program as well. As one of the leading experts on South Asia and the terrorist organizations that are based in the Pakistan-Afghanistan region, how do you evaluate the current threats from terrorists in that region? Has it declined, or are they on the rise?
I think there's no doubt that the threat in that area from Al-Qaeda, Taliban, other local groups, that is significant. In terms of whether it has risen or declined, depends on various different factors. The situation in Afghanistan, whether the government of Hamid Karzai is working, whether NATO forces have been able to stop infiltration, and the political situation in Pakistan. So there have been ups and downs. At various points, the U.S. government issues statements, the CIA, the president. At times, they are related to some political developments. After all, we are in an election year. But there's no doubt that the threat level stays there with a little bit of ups and downs.
Now, as a member of several administrations in Pakistan, we talked about at the intro that you were part of General Musharraf's administration and later at Prime Minister Bhutto's administration. What were some of the lessons that you took away from those experiences that really continue to reinforce and maybe inform the research that you're currently doing?
I think the most important lesson that I have learned, and especially after working in the field as well as a police chief and then working in the administration, and now that I'm in US for the last about 7-8 years, and when I look back and try to analyze and connect those with what I have learned here, I think that history plays a very, very important role. I think that the modern face of religious extremism and militancy that we are witnessing in that region is so inextricably linked with the Afghan war of the 1980s. That was the time when with the Saudi money, the madrasa, the seminary network came up. That is the time when, because Soviet Union had invaded and United States and the rest of the Western world helped Pakistan. And what the Western world as well as Pakistan forgot to learn at that time, that they was supporting a certain segment of society, you can say, militancy. They were doing a great job for the Western world then. They were fighting the infidel, the communists. And we didn't realize that we can switch on that kind of mindset. It's so difficult to decommission them.
Right.
Everyone forgot about that. So that historical linkage, because we should have thought in the West, also in Pakistan, that what to do with these 70,000 militants who were, and these were the ones who were brought in from Egypt, Morocco, Yemen, you name a country. And now there are so many latest books which mention this, that they were all brought in to fight the communists. They were given a certain extremist version or focused more on extremist versions so that they can fight the communists.
So they'd be helpful.
Helpful. And then we just forgot about them because the Soviet Union had fallen, they had gone out of Afghanistan. Those are the people who then some of them turned into the modern day Osama bin Laden, Mullah Umar of Taliban, local militant groups, because they had a mindset, they wanted Islamic states, and Islamic state not in the modern sense. I, in principle, have no issue with the religious government per se, but the dogmatic version that they believe in, to impose their version on others, now they are pursuing that agenda. Yes. And I have learned that that historical linkage is so critical to analyze, and if we want to change it or redo, we'll need to see what went wrong, then to try to do something.
And we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of years of history, if not thousands.
Yes, but especially these 30 years, since the Afghan war, when Soviet Union had invaded, 1979, before that, there was no religious militancy in that area. They were religious hardliners, they were extremists in terms of their political opinion. So I'm fine with that if someone has an extremist viewpoint, but so long as that person is ready to talk about it, stay with that opinion. But the militancy angle that they had guns, and they said, okay, if you don't agree with us, now the answer is a gun. That started in 1970s and 80s.
I see. Very interesting. Thank you for that piece of history, which is helpful. Senator John McCain, whom the media referred to as the presumptive Republican candidate for presidency, has stated that, in his opinion, America will in fact be engaged in Iraq for the next 100 years. He said it on several occasions and so on. Is that an accurate statement, do you think?
I differ with that statement to a little bit, though I agree with Senator McCain's overall view. His overall, I'll just take a minute, his overall view is, he's saying that United States has spent trillions of dollars, so much of effort has gone in. So United States should not leave Iraq just as it is after spending so much of taxpayers' money, and at the end of the day, if US is getting a bad name or blame for everything, so that's not a good deal. So I agree with him that yes, if so much money has gone in, so American prestige and honor is a very, very important thing. So I agree with him on that count. But to think or plan or even perceive that it will take even decades would be some sort of an exaggeration. I don't think he really meant it in this way. But I would not think, I think US should plan in terms of years, 5 years, 3 years, reconstruction, rebuilding, and then at the end of the day to say that we had done something, there were mistakes committed, blunders, but overall it led to democracy in the Middle East, and that should not take even decades. I mean, that should be a manageable thing.
Given all of your experience in Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, all the travel that you've done, do you have any serious hope for peace in that region? Do you think it's resolvable?
In principle, as a political scientist, I would say yes. Every conflict, irrespective of its ethnic, sectarian, or religious nature, is resolvable. After all, we had seen in Europe, since look at the 17th century Europe,
Good point.
Look at the 20th century world wars. Millions of people died. Look at Holocaust, the biggest tragedy, I would say, of the modern 300, 400, 500 years, or maybe more than that. And after that, the Europeans, the French, and the Germans are living together. United States, we went through, again, after 19th century, the Civil War. And so I would say in principle it is entirely possible.
All things are possible.
But yes, the situation in Middle East today is very, very complex. And I don't see an immediate resolution. I think it will take some changes in system of government, education, and that can resolve. I don't see that kind of thinking or decision-making in Middle Eastern leadership at this moment, I must add.
You have a forthcoming book, as I understand it, that's entitled Pakistan's Drift into Extremism. It's got a subtitle, Allah, the Army and America's War on Terror. What do you think the major reasons are for that drift into extremism? And what should American diplomacy do to really counter it successfully? Because that's a major issue, I think, for obviously the Pakistan people, but also those of us who are looking at it from a distance.
Absolutely. The book came out recently, and I think the major issue in case of Pakistan was that when in 1947 the country was created, like Zionists in Israel, they were secular people, modernist, secular, not religious people, and they said, we want a separate land for Muslims, and the leadership was all very educated and British trained. But the idea was that a country is being created in the name of religion. And the problem with that idea is that as soon as you use that idea, then the clerics, the religious elements, they would say, okay, if you are creating a state in the name of religion, then it is we who will define what that state will be like. In Israel, it worked out better comparatively because it is a democracy. Right. In Pakistan, initial years, it's remained a democracy. It came into existence as a democracy. But then the religious elements, the clerics, primarily hardliners in terms of their religious orientation, they said, we will define. And their version or their worldview was quite distorted, narrow-minded. So it created an issue of identity. That, okay, are we an Islamic country? In Pakistan, you will be taught Pakistan is the fort of Islam. I don't think the Saudis or the Iranians or everyone else thinks that Pakistan has that status. But that then explains why Pakistan developed nuclear capacity. Now being the only Muslim country with nuclear weapons technology and nuclear bomb, they think that that gives them that status. But I would revert to this idea of initially identity crisis, of religious elements trying to define state. But they were doing it comparatively in a peaceful fashion, in not very decent or polite way, but nonetheless non-violent. 1980s brought in this Afghan war, brought in this militancy angle. Yes. And since then, they have guns. And they say anyone who disagrees with their version of religion has to face that kind of.
Is it fair to call Pakistan a theocracy?
No, not at all. The reason is that Pakistan produced the first woman as the Prime Minister in any Muslim country, Benazir Bhutto. Unfortunately, she was murdered in December 2008. Sadly and indeed. Very, very unfortunately and sadly. But nonetheless, in 1988, Pakistan voted in a one-person, one-vote pure free elections. She became Prime Minister. She was thrown out by the military. She was again elected by the people. It is an inconceivable thing in any theocracy. Then later on as well, there were other women participants, members of the parliament elected in even rural areas. So it's not theocracy, but the religious elements have been trying to expand their area of influence. Religious political parties in Pakistan, they participated in elections, could never get more than 14% of the vote bank. But they are a vocal minority. Whenever they would be in the assembly, they would say, okay, we need to have religion as the dominant context. We want our laws to be framed according to religion and their version of religion. They are not ready to accept any moderate, any modernist version. So those kind of tussles and struggles are there. But Pakistan is not theocracy in the sense that Iran is or Saudi Arabia is.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I just want to remind our viewers that you're watching Conversations from St. Norbert College. Our special guest this evening is Dr. Hassan Abbas, and we're talking about key issues in the Middle East. To what generally do you attribute the rise of Islamic fundamentalism? And what are some of the major characteristics that separate it from what some people call mainstream Islam? I mean, what do you attribute that to?
I would say this modern phase of fundamentalism or religious extremism that we have seen that is a 20th century phenomenon. And why is it that so? The 20th century, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire in 1920s, a little before that, the Muslim world came to experience the modern state system. In the Western world, in Europe, it had longer experience. Yes, the British, for instance, political system took a long time, but ultimately it was a democracy in the making. For Muslims, as soon as they saw this globalization, you can say, coming out of the Ottoman Empire, coming out of the British mandates, Pakistan, India, for instance, Bangladesh, they were all under the British control till 1940s. Iraq, except Iran, every other country was under some kind of occupation. As soon as they came out of that and to adjust themselves to the modern state system, there was different kinds of reactions. One reaction was from among the religious groups saying that no, we want to enforce a religious law. Yes. And that led to these different strains of extremism. In the Arab world, we had seen Nasser, for instance, who was in Egypt, was a secular leader. Right. In 60s and 70s, let's even add Arafat. He was never a religious extremist. He was a militant. He used also terror tactics at certain points.
But he wasn't religiously based.
Exactly. They were these religious fundamentalists were a reaction also to that secular leadership. And because they despite being in minority, they again, I'm reverting to that, because they often adopt violence, and they think that is sanctioned by their version of religion. So that is one thing. There's this worldview that they not only want to go to heaven, but they want to take you to heaven as well. And that is the major problem.
I'd like to make up my own mind on that.
Exactly, of course.
Now, one of the questions that's always bothered me, just personally, I just want to put on the table, and that is that why is it that more Islamic leaders don't speak out more forcefully against extremism? Now, it may be, of course, that the media don't give them the attention that they give the extremists, but nonetheless, the impression I have is that the leaders are not disavowing extremism, and particularly terrorism, on as forceful a manner as they could. So am I misreading that, or is that, in fact, a fair perception?
I would say there are different ways to look at it, and what you're saying is a legitimate view. However, the concerns are, I would differentiate between the religious leadership, for instance, the Muslim diaspora, who's living in the West. They have serious concerns. I'll just quote one. There's a big Muslim group, Islamic, I'm forgetting their full name, but that's one of the largest Muslim community groups. And they had an event in 2007, for instance, where about 20,000 people came. And it was in Chicago, and their complaint was that, look, even if 20,000 of us get together and we give whatever kind of statements against extremism, it came out maybe in the local newspapers in Chicago, but it was not given widespread. So there's a complaint among Muslims as well. But you're absolutely right that in the Muslim countries, they should have been more vocal about, for instance, after 9/11 tragedy, about Osama bin Laden, about other militant groups. It's partly because of, I would say, their political compulsions, which need to be criticized, and certainly partly fear of the extremist forces, partly because as soon as they criticize some of these major international terrorist groups, they are seen as pro-Western. Because they see that, okay, these militants or terrorists have a direct fight with the West. So if we will criticize them, we will be portrayed as being pro-Western. Yeah. So that, I think these all are reasons, but it has been a learning curve. In 2002, 2003, actually there was a PhD study at one of the Boston universities where did this exactly on this point. It's a very valid point. In 2002, 2003, there were not many strong statements. I would absolutely agree. But with the passage of time, when religious extremism showed its ugly head in different shapes, and when there were local attacks and local law and order serious situations, there has been a positive change as well.
Interesting. Very good. Just want to remind our viewers again that you're watching Conversations from St. Norbert College, and our special guest this evening is Dr. Hassan Abbas, and we're talking about key issues in the Middle East. I know that one of the places that you visited and spoken at actually is the Carter Center at Emory University. Absolutely. And do you think the Carter Center has, over time, been more or less successful in bringing about peace in various regions? And I guess more directly, what role has President Carter played in a lot of those efforts?
I think President Carter, in comparison to some of the other big names, has gained a lot of respect outside the United States. And there's a big reason, and there's a big need for that. Because I would say, for right or wrong reasons, U.S. military campaign in Afghanistan, Iraq, created many different opinions within the world, not only in the Muslim world, in European context, in Africa. And the U.S. support base or image had been damaged or altered in some way, slightly negative, more negative. President Carter, even President Clinton also had done well, but President Carter went out in many countries and took up some issues and concerns which the outside world, or especially in the Muslim world, partly because of the Arab-Israel issue, his view was seen as more objective and neutral. So that face of America is also, it's also important to show the diversity which is available within United States, to show it outside, that not necessarily all those who disagree with President Bush's policy. It was important for the rest of the world to see that no, a former president has an entirely different opinion. He was a president once. I mean, his book, Peace Not Apartheid, which is a very provocative title.
Oh, yes.
But it gels in with the worldview or opinion of many of the people in the rest of the world. It was important for the outside world and the Muslim world to see this, to know that if you have an opinion, you can be a former president, you can say it very provocatively, and it's absolutely fine. Yes. In that way, from that image point of view, I think which is more important than resolving the conflicts, that was a positive thing. Peace Prize, Nobel Prize winning, I think that was a great thing. He deserved it. Whether President Carter's efforts have actually made a difference on the ground, yes, no. Not really. But Camp David, we must remember Camp David Accord.
Major breakthrough.
He was the one who was behind that idea.
Good point. You know, someone once said, I'm paraphrasing here, that war is a continuous revelation of inadequacies. You know, and does that seem applicable to the Iraq war that we're still engaged in?
Yes, and the reason is, of course, war brings many surprises as well, and no one can ever be fully ready for a war. And it never started off as a war. I mean, US, I must give this credit, despite being slightly critical of President Bush's policies, but I think...
Just slightly?
Slightly in a sense that now that what has happened is really... I don't think he really meant to do it. It turned out like that, and there were many other people responsible for that as well. I will not think that it's only President Bush, his Secretary of States. Yes. Colin Powell was there. He was always advising, but then Rumsfeld never allowed Colin Powell to really have his say. Sure. So in that sense,
Vice President Cheney.
Vice President Cheney as well. So I think the initial plan was to get rid of Saddam, and it was an excellent plan. It was a much needed plan. Saddam had to be taken out. The problem is that rather than US getting the credit for doing a great thing, by prolonging the military occupation or actually converting it into a military occupation and then trying to build a democracy, it's not like the Western world has taken hundreds of years to develop democracy. It is no fixed one formula which you just say X2 plus Y2 is this answer, or a chemical reaction or a chemical formula. And there, the biggest surprise came. I think US was not really ready for that plan, because that plan was never debated. Yes. Otherwise, United States has the number of universities, the number of scholars, the number of analysts. It's huge, and they are the best in the world. I don't think if they would have been given an opportunity in 2002, 2003 to comment, and they would have helped, and that's historically the case. Henry Kissinger was a professor at Harvard.
Yes.
There are many, Condoleezza Rice also, but many others. But this present-day U.S. government, especially Bush administration, they took whatever decision they had in mind was in secrecy, and that was, I think, responsible for these inadequacies that now are coming.
Now that's a big lesson to take away from the war. Are there other lessons to take away from the Iraq war?
The other lessons are that in the Muslim world, the Shia-Sunni conflict is very, very complex. I, as a Muslim, and I happen to be from a family where one parent was a Shia and one parent was a Sunni, and I'm married to someone from other different sect than mine. And even if you ask me to exactly to draw a chart and tell what this is Shia and this is Sunni, despite my own upbringing, and it's not possible. And if people in the Bush administration thought that they really understood that and they will be able to really manage that could have been a dream, but they had no plan for that. So the lesson is, if you really want to go for reconstruction, rebuilding with a good viewpoint, with a good ideal in mind, or United Nations go for it, it requires understanding of the regional context and it's not something which is a treasure and which is not known. With some effort, with some investment, that can be done.
You need cultural literacy.
Exactly. I think, and the resource space is available in US. If it would not have been here, it was another matter. But the tragic part is that all that information, all that analysis is available. Yes. And decisions were taken which went against those. Some people think that analysis information was there, but the military-industrial complex has its own dynamics. That view is also there in the U.S.
That again is a helpful perspective. Thank you, very helpful perspective. A colleague of mine from another institution, though, but Professor Jack Shaheen is coming out with a new book, and it's entitled Guilty, Hollywood's Verdict on Arabs After 9/11. And it's receiving, I think, some good advanced publicity and so on, because it deals head-on with the negative kind of stereotyping that goes on with Arabs and Muslims, and a lot of Hollywood material, but in popular culture in general and so on. And that's been a lifelong kind of goal of Dr. Shaheen, is to bring this out in the open and talk about it. What steps do you think we can take to ensure there's a better understanding of the Arab world and the Muslim world in the future? I mean, just in terms of being able to better appreciate it, understand it, and value it, since there's so much negativity in the popular culture.
And the reason for, I think, that for that cultural context or that world view is partly because in 1970s, everything about the Muslim and Arab world was seen from the angle of the Arab-Israel conflict, which the Arab world, and Arab world is hardly 20% of the overall Muslim world. But whatever, for instance, any Palestinian extremist was doing, that was seen as being reflecting the overall Muslim opinion. Right. In 80s, then we saw the Afghan Mujahideen and thought that. Then, I mean, of course, the 9/11 tragedy, but those 19 faces and that terrible act was then seen as, everyone was seen from that light. So media partly, and it was not that someone really played it intentionally. I think it turned out like that. I think the best way to overcome those hurdles is to talk to the Muslim diaspora in the United States. We have about 6 million to 7 million, depending on which newspaper we go, whether we go for Chicago Tribune or New York Times. But the consensus is that the Muslim population in the United States is from maybe 5 million to 7-8 million.
I didn't realize that.
And they are from all different parts of the Muslim world. Some came for economic reasons. Some are here, for instance, many of the Lebanese Muslims came here about 100 years ago. They were later who came in 1960s as well. In case of Iraq, for instance, the most famous family from the important cities of Karbala, which is the most important city with the important shrine in Iraq, the family of clerics who's there is now based in Michigan, again for 50 years or 40 years in Dearborn. Yeah, so those are the people who can be a bridge between United States and the Western world and among the Muslims. They are also the one, I think, the Muslims living in the West, who can play a very creative role in progress and reform within the Muslim world. Having learned here, trying to go back in some ways to tell them how crucial is democracy, how important is freedom of speech, and those things. And there are people who are trying in their tits and bits. I think they can be approached and they can be involved. They can be blamed as well for not coming out openly and integrating, but that has been a slow process. In US, it is much better than the European world. Yes. Because you live for 100 years in France, you can't be French if you came from Morocco or Algeria. In US, you are a US citizen irrespective of your color, your religion, you're an American. That is the asset of this country, and we need to benefit from that resource.
I'd like to thank our special guest, Dr. Hassan Abbas, for sharing his expertise and insights with us this evening. Please join us for future programs as we continue to explore the world of ideas. Until then, I'm Michael Marsden for Conversations from St. Norbert College.